Hi, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. We're following breaking news. Former President Donald Trump has requested a stay of the appeals court ruling that denied his request for immunity from federal prosecution. It's now up to the Supreme Court to take up his case. Trump faces 3 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of obstruction. Jessica Levinson joins us now on the phone. She is a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, thank you for being here and joining us so quickly on the phone. So former President Trump has filed this stay request with the Supreme Court over his immunity appeal. What's next?
What's next is for the Supreme Court to decide if they're going to take this up. And I think after we all saw the opinion by the D.C. Circuit, that per curiam opinion, where they were all united, they spoke with one voice, essentially kneecapping every single one of Trump's arguments in 57 pages. The question was, is the Supreme Court going to review this, or will they say, you know what, we actually have enough Trump litigation, we're going to let the D.C. Circuit decision stand. That would, of course, allow this case to go back to the trial court. It would allow the case to proceed.
What's your expectation about how the Supreme Court might handle this?
Initially, I thought this is a matter of first impression. It's a big question about whether or not presidents have immunity, former presidents have immunity from criminal prosecution based on actions they took while in office. Of course, the Supreme Court will weigh in. But then Jack Smith, now we can all remember a few months ago, went to the Supreme Court, tried to leapfrog over the D.C. Circuit and say, take up this case. The Supreme Court refused, and now I actually think part of that may have been a strategy to let the D.C. Circuit not just act first, but be the last ones to have a ruling on this. And so I now am leaning towards the idea that, no, they're not going to take this case. They're not going to review it, and the D.C. Circuit's opinion will be the last one to stand.
Can you help us step back for a second, Jessica, and understand what the Supreme Court has already considered with regard to former President Trump related to January 6th and what it may do in the future? I can at least count 3 things. They've already considered the 14th Amendment case so far, and they have not made a ruling on that. They now might consider this immunity appeal from former President Trump. And if Trump does go to trial in that Jack Smith case you mentioned, they could consider an appeal in that case should Trump be convicted at some level. What else do you see on the horizon, and how do you understand all of the moving pieces?
Well, another big case on the horizon actually deals with somebody else involved in January 6th, not the former president, but the question is whether or not the statute that the former president is charged under in this D.C. election interference case, whether or not it's a good fit for the events of January 6th. So in this case that's being overseen by Judge Chutkan, the first question, of course, is the one that you and I have been talking about, which is the former president immune from criminal prosecution? But the second question then is, if he isn't, are the proper statutes being used here? Because there are 2 statutes that he's charged under, and one of them deals with obstruction of official proceedings that was really designed to prevent white-collar malfeasance. It was really designed to protect against the CEO who is shredding documents, who engaged in malfeasance, who's under investigation. And so the Supreme Court, in a case having nothing to do with Trump, but everything to do with Trump, will be looking at whether or not that statute is a good fit in these January 6th prosecutions. If they conclude that it's not, then as far as I can see it, about half of this January 6th case could go away.
Let's go back to this issue of immunity in the presidency. Much of this discussion goes back 50 years to Watergate and President Richard Nixon and his claims of presidential immunity. What was decided then by the court on this front, and how is that influencing what they might do with Trump?
Those are hugely influential. So we're looking at a couple of cases, and 2 of them involve former President Nixon. In one case, he said, I have executive privilege. So it's not immunity. He said, I have privilege. I don't have to hand over those Oval Office documents to the special prosecutor who was investigating Watergate. And part of his argument was, I'm the president. I don't have to comply with a subpoena. The Supreme Court said, yes, you do. You do have executive privilege, but it's not absolute. Then in another case involving President Nixon, he was sued essentially for unlawful termination, where he had fired somebody who was a civilian analyst for the Air Force. And there the Supreme Court said you have absolute immunity in a civil case based on being sued for official acts. So former President Trump's attorneys have pointed to that case saying, basically, let's extend that out from civil immunity and let's also include criminal immunity. But part of what that first Nixon case, the Oval Office tapes case that we were just talking about, acknowledges is that criminal cases are different, and there's a much higher public interest in allowing those cases to continue.
Jessica Levinson, as insightful as ever. We really appreciate you taking the time to stop by and discuss this breaking news.